But with the boat sitting for a couple months and not being used at all, and parts not moving, I ran into a particular issue. That particular issue was my steering. I could steer right all day long. I can get it to shift all the way over, but I can only get the outboard to about the neutral position, the middle position, about 180 degrees, and maybe a few degrees deflection over that if I really forced it. But I didn't want to force it too much and break anything because I knew it was pretty much seized. So what I had to do is go underneath and start taking some stuff apart. All right, so here we are under the dash. I had to pull a panel off, move some wires, stuff like that. And it's a SeaStar Solutions steering assembly. And once this goes, once you start snapping stuff inside, you pretty much have to replace the whole thing. But fortunately, I didn't have to because I stopped, like I said before, I put too much torque on it and wrecked things. But the steering cable, you'll see in a second here, was definitely done. So steering cable went in here. I've already taken it out, but there's two bolts here that come out. I don't know what size those are offhand. Don't have a socket with me, but easy enough to figure out. And this one here, this is just a like a return tube. So the main steering cable comes in here. It goes around. It's like a spring-like mechanism. Comes around and it comes out this tube. It's just like an exit tube. So when you have extra parts of your steering assembly, it doesn't just go jam and poke things. It stays safely into this tube. But I got these out, pulled this part out. Definitely involved some fishing that was a little difficult because everything came up through here and out here, and I'm worried putting it back in is going to be kind of a pain, and I don't want to take everything apart. I may have to take some stuff apart, but if I can just try to fish it gently, may take a while, we'll see. But that's not where the real problem started. This is just a Mercury 60 horsepower outboard. Nothing fancy about it. It looks like, and I had to do a lot of looking online and talking to people, and it pretty much seems that this is kind of a standard way of connecting these things. It's pretty simple. Your steering cable goes into here. You see I had to cut it off, and we'll get to that in a minute. Steering cable goes through here and then attaches, you see this little hole right here, this little linkage here, this little arm that actually will steer your boat, or your motor rather, I guess your boat. And there's a nut, a couple washers, that sandwiches that. So I took that off in the hopes of, with everything being disconnected in the front that I showed you, that I could just pull this little armature. It's like a little ram arm that I could just pull this out. But lo and behold, that didn't want to happen. My biggest issue of all that I found, and I did not see this anywhere online. Nobody I talked to has had this issue, and I'm sure it's happened to other folks, but it happened to me in spades, was this nut, this retaining nut, that's a little lock nut, has a little rubber gasket in it of some sort, that is hooked onto this pivot tube, did not want to come off. I tried every wrench, I tried every penetrating fluid. I didn't want to put heat on it. I was worried about, I wasn't quite sure what I had in there. This was all new to me. I didn't want to melt things and wreck things, so I was just trying force and lubrication, penetrating oils, try to dissolve stuff, tapping it with a hammer, trying different stuff. It did not want to move. It was completely seized. Ultimately, what I had to do is get a hacksaw. Now I've got almost like a little coping saw type thing, and just make a cut, make a cut, make a cut, ever so gently so as not to get down to the threads. Once I got to the point where I could see it was super thin and I was pretty much going to be at or near the threads, I started using chisels, and just not to really cut it, but just to spread it apart and break it. So I used different sizes of chisels to get it to a point where finally I cracked that aluminum. At that point, started taking different punches, kind of knocking it open, and sure enough, it was completely impacted with salt. Completely impacted with salt. I've since brushed it off. I nicked one thread. I had to touch it up with a thread file, which is no big deal. The new nut goes on it perfectly. But that was my #1 issue. And then I couldn't get this thing to retract. Most of your steering cable problems are going to occur here. Unless you have a catastrophic failure of your steering mechanism, this is undoubtedly where the vast majority of your steering issues are going to happen when you have things seizing up and whatnot. Like I say, I had to take bolt cutters, cut this off, because it was just so difficult to work with. And I had to go on the other side and drift this thing out as best I could. So I had this little brass rod that I used to kind of pound it out because I don't want to do any damage inside. Little interesting side note, this little brass rod has been used on shape charges and explosives and stuff all over the place. to seat them. I've had this thing for way longer than I hate to admit. And for whatever reason, I kept it. I don't really use it a whole bunch for anything, but it came in super handy the other day. So I was able to finally drift this out and punch it, punch it, punch it, punch it, punch it, punch it. Now this little, it's like a ram. This external wider diameter piece should actually easily slide on this, but it doesn't. It's very seized inside there. Now, if I could have taken this whole thing apart and got that nut off initially, I probably could have fixed it, anti-seized it, done a few things, and put the old cable back into service, but it wasn't happening, so I had to kind of chop it up and do all that stuff. But you see what happened. I got that out. Then it was still really difficult to get it clean inside here. It was pretty corroded, pretty pitted. I probably have to replace this tube. I'm not going to yet. I'm just going to kind of use it for the meantime. On my next service, I'm going to be 100% replacing this pivot tube. And I'll show you here a little picture of what it looked like inside. Yeah, super not cool, right? So I could even get the old one. I was kind of, I have the new one set up. I tried putting it in real quickly, didn't want to go. So I backed out. I don't want to scar it up. I don't want to scratch it up. So I kind of used this one, tried to push it in a few more times. Didn't happen. I needed a broach. I needed some way of cleaning that out. So I used a 12 gauge bore brush, just a bronze bore brush, put it on a drill, ran it through. It seemed to help a little bit, but there's no way I was going to get it to a point where I could actually fix it and make it serviceable. I'm going to have to get a whole new tube. I wasn't willing to give up. And then I thought, well, what about a broach? Like an internal rasp of some sort. Well, I don't have broaches. I don't have a broach that's going to fit something like that. What I did have was a tap that fit perfectly. I'm not even sure what size it is. It's old, it's worn off, it's rusted. I think it's like 5/8 or something. And I was able to get that in and just tap it through, tap it through, tap it through with my handy dandy brass rod that I've had forever in my punch, piece of shear stock. And then I would knock it all the way through, and then I would give it about 1/8 of a turn, punch it through again, pull it out, 1/8 of a turn, the whole time giving it a little taste of Mr. WD-40. Finally got it to a point where it would work back and forth just fine. Now that's a couple minutes of explanation and hours of work. It was real difficult to drift that out, and now it's super clean, and we're going to get the new one in there. So when I bought this cable, if you have to replace a cable, look for the number on it. They all have numbers on them somewhere. I don't know where the one is on this, but they all have numbers somewhere. And as crazy as it is, the old cable had the number on it. We Googled it. It showed up on Amazon. These things are like $100. They're cheap. They are far less expensive than I thought they were going to be. But there's a little video that comes along with the website for the folks that manufacture and sell these things, made in America, by the way. And they talk about how this is a standard part of your service. Once to twice a year, this whole thing should come off. This little ram, see how that just pulls out easy peasy, but it didn't on the other one? Look at that. This ram, as well as the inside of this tube, should be lubed with proper lube. I don't know what kind yet. I'll have to figure out exactly what to use. I'll probably just use some kind of marine grease for now, but at least twice a year I'll be doing this. Every time I do any kind of service on this outboard, I'm going to be doing that. Little piece of knowledge I didn't know about, but I'm glad I do now. All right, we're back under the dash. We're at the steering assembly, and you can see here we've got the steering cable coming in this top part. It goes around and pops out back here. This absolutely could not have been done without the love of my life helping me. Definitely a two-person job to fish it. I'm not going to bore you with the details because every vessel is going to be different. But you can see we've kind of got the end there. So what we've done is, as soon as we fed the kind of that spring part, lights in the way, there we go, of the steering cable in here, it grabs it. And now I just grab the steering wheel and I'm turning it to the left until it feeds in. Now we've got that part. I don't know if I can do it while we're on video, but it should. This should just feed into here. I'll probably need two hands to do it. Actually, these are going to be in the way. But you can see that little collar, that little recess. So when that fits inside here, these two bolts go in and they hold it in place. And then this part of the steering is pretty much done. But I'm going to turn off the video and I'm going to get it mounted in there by hand. All right, you can see we got it in there. Once we had it fed in, we couldn't really get that collar in until I just grabbed that steering wheel. Love of my life, pushed on the cable from the back of the boat just to kind of take some of that stress off of it, put some relief on it. And then I had to just crank that wheel to the left until it kind of sucked it up as much as it could, and then it pulled that part in. It turns out it's an 11 mil socket. One better than 10. So we'll get these in here, and then I'll try to get that tube on the bottom piece. Actually, that should be pretty easy. All I'm gonna have to do is turn the steering wheel the other way and make this retract in so it's just a nubbin sticking out, then put that tube on this fella, and then kind of repeat the similar process we're doing up here. Okay, we got that part in. That was actually a lot more difficult to get in than the front part of the steering cable, getting it into this assembly, just because there was about an 8-inch tail on this. 8-inch, yeah, 6-inch, 8-inch, something like that. And it was difficult to bend while getting that tube in a position where it wasn't going to put untoward tension on this thing. So kind of had to push the tube back into that way, but feed it around to get the cable in. But regardless, again, every vessel's different, but it's in there now. Let's grab that steering wheel and do some turning. My gosh, just like that. Wow. All right, let's go hook it up on the linkage in the back, hook everything up, and see if we have a vessel that steers. All right, back out here now. This nut is just kind of sitting here. It's not tightened or anything yet. Something I figured I have to do is kind of get this in the right position before I tighten that nut. Because once I tighten that nut, this has a tendency not to want to turn. It's kind of torqued in there. So I'm just going to find the point of least resistance. I'm going to drop that one. Always have something extra. There, that actually sits really nice right there. So we'll hook that linkage back on with the right nuts and bolts. All right, we'll get that on. Oh, wrong way. It's a little nylock nut. We don't want it to go tight. We want it so that there's still just a little bit of play in there. Coming off the bottom. A little more. I'm winging all this, just so you know. This is figuring it out as I go. Okay, so snug, and then back. I don't know, I'll do like half a turn or something. It won't go anywhere, but definitely something worth checking every now and then. Checking all these parts and pieces. All right, so go back over here. And now we'll tighten that nut on. All right, we got that nut tightened on. It's just snug. I gotta look at the manufacturer specs, see if there's any kind of torque requirements, any kind of past a certain point or anything, and see. I don't think so, but better safe than sorry. Get it all cleaned up. I put the cowling on just because it looks so much nicer that way. And oh, here we are up the steering wheel. Hang on a sec here. Ta-da! Oh my gosh, it can go all the way to the left. It can go all the way to the right. Awesome. Easy peasy. And again, the problems you're going to have, I took a wrench out of there. I had to tighten the nuts on that pivot tube. And what that pivot tube is for your trim. So it doesn't have a lot to do with the steering, although that steering ram, that rod does go through the middle of it. That grease zert right there, that is just for, again, the pivot tube. That's not for the steering, but also something very important to make sure it stays greased. So there you go, folks. Got her done. Take care, everybody. God bless each and every one of you. God bless America.